Fresh, fierce fighting between Israel and Hamas has rendered uncertain prospects of the global economy that pundits had earlier gauged was simply limping along, not sprinting. So what looked to be the ripple effects of this violent confrontation on global oil prices? What countermeasures are in place here in Korea? And what do pundits propose in preparation for the possibility of a prolonged conflict? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we explore the potential economic consequences of the fresh conflict in the Middle East. For more on this, I have Professor Song Soo-young at Chung-Ang University live on the line. Professor Song, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Hur Joon-young at Sogang University with us as well. Professor Hur, it's a pleasure.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Right. Professor Song, before we touch upon the potential economic repercussions of the fresh fighting in the Middle East, do tell us a bit about the current state of the global economy and the outlook for next year.
The most recent outlook forecast made by the IMF has shown us that the overall economy had shown slow recovery. Clearly, the economic phase is in the recovery stage, but however, it's very slow and also is quite sputtered by some explosion or outbreak of geopolitical crisis. Currently, the Israel and Palestine is really a threat. It has not been exploded to be some regional-wide war between the Israel and some allies. However, currently the economic situation has been characterized by the divergence of the recovery between the advanced economies and some emerging markets. And also among the advanced economies, each country has shown different phase of the economic recovery. So that regard implies that each country must be prepared and must have their own idiosyncratic some response and steps to foster and facilitate its own economic recovery.
Right, and talking about individual countries, Professor Hur, how is the Korean economy faring this year and what are the prospects for the year ahead?
Yeah, the Korean economy is not in the good shape in this year, in the sense that, like Professor Song brought about the IMF current prediction about the world economy, and the Korean economy is expected to grow this year 1.4%, which is kind of very low, and next year like 2.2%. So the IMF also they decreased the world economy the growth by 2.9 in recently. So I think the Korea is a very heavily export-driven economy. The global economy is in a bad kind of shape. Then the Korean economy cannot go along just wow. So I think that this year and next year, the Korean economy is likely to face very tough situations. So.
Right, and talking about tough situations, Professor Song, perhaps the greatest concern with regard to the fresh fighting between Israel and Hamas is its potential impact on oil prices. What are your thoughts with regard to this concern?
Recently, I have seen some movement of the Western Texas Intermediate futures price, and the Brent price has relatively hovering around $80 and $90. So that is a little bit lower than the outbreak of the Ukraine and Russian war in 2022, and during the aftermath of some OPEC and OPEC Plus has. Particularly the Saudi Arabia, Russia has agreed to reduce the supply. So that is a very serious threat to Korean economy because we have to import all the oils from foreign countries. However, actually that kind of oil crisis is not a threat against the United States because United States has not only they have their own reservoirs of the oil such as shale gas, and once the price is higher than $50, they can rely on the shale gas. So That is a really dilemma for the Saudi and Russia. Even though they reduced the supply, the other countries have no reason to follow that. So to that regard, clearly Korea's economy depends upon the oil import. Therefore, we have to be very careful to maintain some balanced position with regard to some because of the political issues such as the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. The best one is remain balanced. I think I would like to cannot but emphasize more than the balance anymore. Yeah.
Right, a balanced approach. Professor Hur, what countermeasures has the government here shared in response to the potential spike in oil prices, and do you believe they are sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, most of all, the Korean government is extending the fuel tax reduction policy, which is supposed to be terminated this month, so until the end of this year, so that the consumer of the fuel can purchase the oil at a relatively less price, lower price. And also, this has not, little to do with the rising oil prices, but the food prices another kind of cause of inflation in Korea. So the Korean government is, this is like kimjang season. So the Koreans are preparing for kimchi for the upcoming winter. So, the government plans to supply more than 2,000 tons of cabbages. And also by the end of this month, they intend to supply more than 10 tons of salt at a 50 discount. So, but I don't think that these are enough, but the problem is all these measures, the counteracting measure requires government budget. But the government budget situation in Korea this year is not in a good shape in the sense that unexpected tax revenue shortfall of 60 trillion won. So the government, is not likely have enough finance to practice the counteracting measures.
Right, and staying with perhaps some of the challenges faced by the government, Professor Song, I understand Korea has 8 items that are over 90% reliant on Israeli imports. What more can you tell us about the danger of such dependence, and what are your thoughts on the prospects perhaps of import market diversification?
Yeah, as for these, particularly there's some rare earths or some very chemically important materials. For example, the bromine has been imported largely from Israel. But however, this kind of, when we look into some trade relationship between the South Korea and Israel, actually we have always trade deficit. So it means that we have import more some advanced products from Israel rather than exporting. So to that regard, among them, there are some very important materials, AI technology, and are very important. But however, the bromine, which is used as some flame deterrent, particularly for the mining and some other chemicals, and also could be used for the biotechnology issues such as production of collagen-related products. But however, bromine is mostly imported, and the largest consumer is currently China. And China has recently, they have developed some very big reservoir for the bromine source in Sichuan. Therefore, that is what I would like to emphasize is even for bromine is produced by Israel, Jordan, and currently in the U.S. And China has produced, most of them are consumed domestic market. But however, China has developed its source of the bromine, then it means that sometimes we need to rely on some import from China once the bromine has been produced and generated by China. Therefore, we should not give up the opportunities to import some rare and important materials from diverse countries worldwide. Otherwise, the risk is too much for South Korean economy.
Right, I see. Professor Hur, is there a way for Korea perhaps to better prepare for the possibility of a prolonged conflict in the Middle East?
I think there are, two aspects of it. The first one is like for the firms. So, as I briefly mentioned, Korea is a kind of heavily export-driven economy. So, the Korean government should be able to prepare for establishing measures to counteract, to minimize the local businesses and export companies. So as a part of this plan, actually, the Korean government establishes and operates a public-private joint export emergency response team right now to minimize negative impact on export. I think this is for the firm side. For the household side, I think, the government also has to be ready to alleviate the burden on household in anticipation of the continued higher oil prices. Especially in this aspect, I would emphasize that, the Korea has now, the issue of rising electricity prices and public transportation fares. So also, Korea government did a part of it. But in the future, people anticipate that, what has been done, in terms of the electricity prices and transportation fares, the increment is not enough. So in the future, people expect that it will go up again. So I think the government should be very, very, very well designed in timing and the amount of rise in the electricity prices and transportation fares, so that the household will not be damaged by the high oil prices in the future.
Right, of course, placing priority on the cost of living here in the country. Professor Song, what else do you propose for Korea as it seeks to perhaps bolster its economy against these rampant external risk factors?
Yeah, as Professor Hur mentioned, that Korean economy so far has relied on the export-driven wealth accumulation or some kind of economic growth. However, I have a little bit nuanced approach to minimize the risk and considering the rampant external risk factors. Then one way to avoid that, reduce some reliance on the international trade, because it means the more we rely on the international trade, we are affected by foreign factors more than domestic factors. So when I look at some statistical issues, data from the IMF, which has been recently published, it has shown that relative real GDP and the domestic demand is quite weakened. So it means that is quite distinctive feature, different feature than the U.S., because the U.S. had a very strong domestic demand. Also, in China, Chinese economy currently they suffered from some setback in some real estate industry. Then they would like to shift their driving from some export-driven or international trade-driven economic growth. Rather, they focus on some domestic demand. So that is a suggestion made by some world-renowned economists. So to that regard, I would like to say that for the South Korean economy, what is necessary right now is not only the diversification of the import-export, but also some intra-economy diversification, because we need some bolstering of domestic demand and domestic consumption. That is one way to minimize, ameliorate the risk.
Right, indeed. Professor Hur, even prior to the fresh fighting in the Middle East, there was much concern about the economic implications of the lingering effects of the pandemic, Russia's warfare in Ukraine, and as Professor Song mentioned, China's slow rebound, especially amid its property market woes. That being said, Professor Hur, out of these three threats which I've mentioned, which do you suppose is most risky for Korea?
So in the short run, I think the Chinese factor is the most important, I think. So because we are heavily, export-driven economy. At the same time, a lot of export actually, destination is China. So also in terms of the product, the semiconductor industry is actually at the core of the export sector. So, we have high dependence on Chinese, export to China. Also, we have high dependence on the export of semiconductors. But a lot of a substantial fraction of semiconductors are actually exported to China. So Chinese slow rebound actually is a kind of adverse news to the Korean economy. But a good news actually today released about the third quarter economic growth of China is actually higher than the market expectation. So if the China's economic growth is fostered and fastened, then there's more rosy picture of the Korean economy in the next year, I think.
Right, hopefully. Professor Song, some say geopolitical risk factors are likely to push forward deglobalization. What do you say?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the divergence between the advanced economies and some emerging markets, and even among the advanced economy, there is clearly divergence. So that is actually propelled by some deglobalization trend. So currently, the most typical threat is a geopolitical issue. So in order to foster the economic development, and the geopolitical issues has been pressed. However, recently, in order to achieve the geopolitical goal, they weaponized economic problems. So that is a really serious threat. So that is called as geo-economization. Regardless of political issues, agendas, then people or countries, in order to achieve their political dominance over the other countries, they weaponize the economic problems. So as a result, we have seen the emergence of some kind of economic blockade, and that is only benefit for the countries which have a very diverse economy within and wide territory. However, for such as South Korea, even though very highly populated, however, the territory itself is small and then rely very much on the international trade, really it's going to be risky. So because we have not made, if we do not maintain the balance, then the risk becomes very high, because once the U.S., for example, we rely too much on the U.S. and Japan for export only, without we have a shutdown from China, then if U.S., when they need some Chinese support and relationship improvement, then U.S. can easily discard Korean. They don't take care of Korean economy anymore. What is more important is their benefit. So to that regard, I emphasize some balanced position despite the divergence and some geo-economic and geopolitical problems pervade around. Then we have to maintain some kind of balance within the domestic and the economy and also international trade.
Right, I see. And likewise, Professor Hur, is globalization itself going through a period of some kind of correction, or is it on course for a reversal, do you think?
Oh, yeah. When people think about deglobalization, they think that, it is a recent phenomenon, but actually it is not. So deglobalization is not actually a recent phenomenon in the sense that if you measure the world export share of world GDP, actually it has a decreasing trend after the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9. So, I mean, due to factors like the U.S.-China trade conflict, it is expected that this trend will accelerated in the future. So given South Korea's high dependence on export, the reconfiguration of the global trade order is an area that will continue to receive significant attention, I think.
Right, especially going forward then. All right, Professor Hur, thank you so much for your insights. And Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. We'll return with yet another panel discussion, same time tomorrow. That is Thursday, so do join us then.